Hey guys, Loman02. Currently going to be doing a Canadian Highlander video, deck tech, theory of play, and some gameplay with this deck that you have in deck. The deck concept is basically Turbo Delve, but what I wanted to actually get out of this deck is build a deck that one is a function of a Xerox engine, which means a vast amount of card selection and card velocity. I.e., we're using cards like Faithless Looting, Careful Study, to really get to the right threats and answers. Basically, to have a very flexible, just deck that can be aggressive or controlling. Basically, a very quintessential Switch deck, which in some ways is reminiscent of like a mid-range deck, but its cards are a lot more polarizing. So they're going to vary in quality based on any given matchup that you're currently in. One of the hallmarks of Xerox style engine decks, though, is efficiency, and I kind of found that with Grixis, I think I was able to get to pretty significant efficiencies, especially utilizing the Delve mechanic and Phyrexian mana to really get after having as much impact out of my cards while still being a one land per turn style deck. The only form of ramp that's in this deck or acceleration is Deathrite Shaman. Otherwise, my points in the Canadian Highlander format have been committed to essentially card draw in the form of Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise, and Ancestral Recall. My last remaining points in True Name Nemesis, is just another closer, and it's probably not even necessary in the deck. I could probably look to add maybe Merchant Scroll or even Seeker, Spell Seeker. But let me go through how this deck's broken down. So it's kind of a bizarre deck. I've built a lot of different Grixis decks. As you can see a bunch of them over on the far left-hand side. This is actually probably one of my favorites, actually, so far, because I feel like it kind of best adapts to design trend in the modern Magic, while still allowing you to play like a control game plan, but actually closing the game out quickly. As you can see, this has 22 or 21 creatures in it. Has a bunch. 21's actually the number of creatures because we are playing a Street Wraith. So this is not kind of a sit around grind value Grixis style deck. It's more of an end the game by turn 4 to 5 to 6 kind of style deck while still disrupting your opponent throughout the process of doing that. So the way this deck's broken down is you have committed mana over here. This is all the fetchable mana. So all of my fetch lands and all of my non-basics that are fetchable, that are dual lands, for lack of a better term than the basics. There are 3 basics in the deck: 1 snow-covered island, 1 island, and 1 swamp. The snow-covered and the regular island are just in there in case I opt to, at some point in time put a Tainted Pact option in here. When I started the build off, I started off with a Tainted Pact option in it. If you're not familiar with Tainted Pact, it says basically reveal the top card of your library until there's a card you want to have. Then you put that card in your hand, and everything else you've seen up to that point gets exiled, so it's gone permanently. But the caveat on Tainted Pact is if you see a duplicate copy of any given card, then Tainted Pact just doesn't resolve. Well, you don't get anything. I guess it still resolves technically. You just don't get anything. It's already resolved at that point, but Tainted Pact just basically fizzles itself, and you get nothing. So it's not possible to fizzle on a Tainted Pact in this deck if I were to opt to run it, which at one point in time I was. That said, the mana base is pretty simple. The reason we have the Tropical Island and the Breeding Pool in here is for activations off Deathrite Shaman, and then for reasons that I'll kind of talk to when we get to the maybe board over here, which you'll see there's some green cards in here, because I think the best way to take this deck is to actually go 4-color with it. Go into 4-color check pile tempo. So after the base mana here, the rest of the mana is over here. You have the fast lands in this deck. You have the check lands in this deck. You have River of Tears, which is kind of a weirdo land, but blue-black is the base set of colors. You have Sunken Runes. We have double blue and double black cards at the 3 CMC spots, so we're playing the Sunken Runes, then Shivan Reef and Underground River, because we're a deck that requires this mana to be correct quickly. We don't mind taking the damage to have it, but I don't think we're quite at a Mana Confluence City of Brass build right now. You go into this 15 pile right here. This is the counter magic the deck has available to it. You have Daze, Mental Misstep, Force of Will, Force of Negation, Stifle, Spell Pierce, or Snare, Pierce, Force Spike, Is It Charm, Counter Squall, Deprive, Counter Spell, Remand, Memory Lapse, and Mana Leak. So basically all of our counter magic caps off at 2 CMC. Not literally, because Force of Will is a 5 CMC card, so is Force of Negation, or it's a 3 CMC card, but they cast for 0 functionally in the deck. You're never really hard casting them, or I have not yet. So all very, very efficient. The lowest on the totem pole is probably Deprive right now. I actually like it worse than Memory Lapse, but at some point in time, what I'd like to probably do is explore taking this into 4-color and putting Evasive Action in over Deprive. The double blue is not the most challenging because it is the primary color of this deck. It's basically a blue-based tempo deck. But, I would prefer to have something like Evasive Action where it's just kind of like an upgraded Mana Leak. Sometimes it'll just be a Miscalc. You'll notice I'm not playing certain counter spells in this deck. Miscalc has been cut at this point. Logic Knot is no longer in the deck. There's a lot of Delve cards in this deck, and I actually found that the counter spells tended to be kind of like the worst draws I had in the deck. I was like, why can't I just go faster? Because effectively it does the same thing. If you play a Rival Master, it effectively does the same thing as countering a spell 2 turns from now. It just means that spell is never going to be relevant because the game will be over. Which is kind of like the theory behind the deck is sometimes less is more in this counter spell department. And having more counters that actually pitch to stop what the opponent's doing or to protect what you're doing. Tend to just be better. You play a cheap 1 to 2 mana threat and then just go to town. Alright, so jumping into this next pile, you have the point removal. And this is a pile that I think could flex significantly depending on what you're playing against. If you're not playing against, combination, if you're playing against combination style decks, some of these cards can come out. Chain Lightning is probably the worst removal spell I have in this deck. But at the same time, it also can go into this pile right here, which is the threat pile. Similar to Forked Bolt, Kolaghan's Command, Lightning Bolt, they actually can do something else. They can just kill someone, which makes their flexibility a little bit higher. And then you start looking at cards like Fire Ice. Ice could go over here in the card draw / selection pile. It's also disruption for mana bases, so it's quite powerful. And you'll note that a lot of our cards kind of have as much as possible a wide range of flexible applications based on game state. Fatal Push just should kill most things that are relevant in the format. If they're casting 5-drops off a Crypt or a Soul Ring, well, that sucks. You're probably going to lose the game. Draw better and have Force of Negation to counter, or Mental Misstep to counter their Soul Ring, or counter, their Mana Crypt or whatever. Flame Slash just kills a lot. Kills a Brimaz, kills an Izzet Drake, whatever. Just, kills a lot of big stuff, and it's very, very cheap. Keeps the board open. Chain Lightning, just efficient. It can go to face. It can go to a creature. It's 1 mana. It's sorcery speed, which is kind of a downside to the card, especially against flash threats, but it's still very strong. Dismember just does a bunch. So this is a Death Shadow deck, so I am playing Dismember and Snuff Out because I am running Death Shadow. We have a ton of fetch lands because we're set up to have a 4-color mana base, and at some point I probably will take the deck in that direction. But Death Shadow can get large very fast because this deck in general, because of the efficiencies of a lot of the spells that involve Phyrexian mana or alternate cost for life, alternate cost for life. Where's some more of them at? Gitaxian Probe, yep. Dark Confidant, yep. Thoughtseize, yep. So, you start looking at all this, and it adds up. You chip a lot of life off your life total. And if you're in a contested matchup or against an aggressive deck, some of these cards can be a liability. I think I heard it described as aggressive alpine skiing. And that may be true. And I kind of want to take this deck even in a more aggressive, to a more aggressive place sometime soon. But a lot of these cards do damage, and the intent is that it synergizes well with Death Shadow. Additionally, I kind of wanted to have varied mana cost in a lot of my cards because I'm running Embodiment of Agonies. I'm not sure if I'm totally sold on this card, and I think if I do make the conversion over to a 4-color check pile tempo-based deck, this Embodiment would probably become a layable, because I just think the card does a little bit more. So anyways, Forked Bolt, Kolaghan's Command, just very flexible removal, can get you back a threat that you may want, get you back a Snapcaster, maybe a Direfleet Daredevil, Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is very powerful in this deck because of the volume of 1 CMC spells. Snuff Out, yep, just kills anything that's not black. You can pay 4 life if you have a Swamp, which is not very hard to set up in this deck. Wasteland, I generally put this in my board impacting card pile. I don't tend to treat it as a land. So it's a 32 land deck, but I tend to treat it as a 31 land deck and treat Wasteland as a spell. This next pile here is my card engines. Well, not card engines, but the card filtration. Some of it is straight up draw, like card advantage cards, and some of it's just filtration. Some of it's filtration at the expense of cards, which tends to be fine because, like we're kind of showing, and you see the piles here, we have a wide range of different things that we have going on. We rely on Delve to have this deck function, so, going down on cards based on, using a Faithless Looting or a Careful Study, or where are you at, buddy? Right here. Is honestly, it's not a bad deal because a lot of the cards are not going to be relevant in certain matchups. Like Dismember is not good in every matchup. Sometimes you just don't want to Dismember against like a Paradox Academy deck. Get rid of that thing. Find yourself a Force of Negation, a Force of Will, and a Braid or a Kolaghan's Command. Get pressure down with like whatever you can find, a Vidillion Click, a True Name Nemesis, and then just back it up with counter spells plus Artifact Destruction and ride it out to a win. Is kind of what you need to do. Sometimes the hand attack's going to come late in the game and you just don't want it, so you Faithless Looting away your Cabal Therapy, your Duress, your Inquisition, your Thoughtseize. You look and see Cabal Therapy in this deck. Yeah, I don't have a ton of ways to look at folks' hands. I mean, I have the Vidillion Click, I have the Gitaxian Probe, but I also have a lot of their discard. And Cabal Therapy is a fine card to pitch in your yard because eventually you can just use it off a Pyromancer token or a Goblin Rabble Master or Legion War Boss token, and it's just fine. So Faithless Looting it away is not a big deal. Take Through Time and Treasure Cruise, 2 pointed cards. These obviously take you up on cards at the expense of utilizing your graveyard as a resource to provide mana. You're never hard casting these. Chart of Course is just fine in more aggressive, control-y style decks like this. I have a lot of threats. I'm going to be pressuring my opponent. I'm trying to end the game. It really depends on the matchup. The deck has the ability to end the game by turn 4 to 5. It's probably a turn 5 deck in general on average, but it doesn't have to. It can grind because it has a massive amount of selection, so it can choose how it wants to fight. Whatever deck it's fighting against, which is kind of like the power of the deck as well. Some of the singular cards are not as strong as a standard mid-range build, but the ability to turn them into different cards is quite strong, and ideally those other cards that you turn them into are relevant ones. Faithless Looting kind of gets after more of the same of what I was talking about, just turning irrelevant cards into mana resources in your graveyard, and or fuel for pumping up an Embodiment of Agonies, or powering a Grim Lavamancer or Deathrite Shaman to kill them, or possibly putting relevant cards in for Snapcaster Mage later. Thought Scour, same thing, fills up the bin. It works well with Delve, and just cycles itself. Serum Visions, one of the worst cantrips in this deck, but it's fine. It's not a card disadvantage cantrip, but it doesn't really fuel the graveyard exceedingly well, but it's still acceptable enough, I think, to play. Preordain, yep, it's great. Probably one of the top 3 in the format as far as cantrips go. Ponder, without a fetch land, probably the best cantrip in the format. Brainstorm, I think, is the most powerful cantrip in the... Well, Ancestral Recall is the most powerful cantrip in the format. But Brainstorm, outside of accepting pointed cards, Brainstorm is the most powerful. And I think in a deck like this where you have, I believe it's 11 fetch lands, and a lot of different ways to shuffle your deck, Brainstorm is just hugely powerful. Not to mention, even if you don't shuffle, you have a lot of ways to get rid of cards off the top of your deck, like Mental Note, like Thought Scour. Brainstorm works well to set up a Delver of Secrets, works well to set up Dark Confidant, just does quite a bit. Ancestral Recall, yeah, this is the most powerful cantrip. It's the original cantrip, and it has not been bested, ever. This is my 7-point card in the deck. Draw 3 cards. If you know anything about me and you've watched some of my videos, I am a person who enjoys casting Ancestral Recall. Really, I enjoy value, and that's kind of why I enjoy decks like this, because it really is all about value. You're just transmuting chaff into good stuff, and using it as it's relevant in given the context of the matchup you're in to actually win. So I love decks like this because they offer a lot of really interesting play decisions. They offer a lot of flexibility to the pilot themselves to make judgment-based calls and ideally convert it into match win percentage. Ancestral Vision, this card is actually getting a little bit slow in the deck. One of the sells in this card, it's a little bit of a Timmy kind of upside to it, is that you can get it back for free with Dreadhorde Arcanist, which is just a lot of cards, just asinine. This card's powerful. It's a good turn 1 play. You don't generally want to tend to see it late. But again, in the right matchup, if you have this in your opener, it's one of the best things you could be doing early in the game. And if it's not right, you have a lot of ways of getting rid of it. And if you don't keep a hand on it, the relevant or the likelihood of seeing it's pretty low. Gitaxian Probe, just good to have some information or known information early on. It's a free spell with Young Pyromancer. It fuels up the graveyard, works with a lot of our delve spells, helps fuel Cabal Therapy. A lot of cool little inner synergies with Gitaxian Probe. One of the cards that I've been asked recently, why don't you try to play this card, is Manamorphose. And frankly, the reason I'm not running it right now is because I just don't have room. Without going down land in the deck, which I think the deck is running as lean as I want it to run. I think it's already pretty aggressively lean at 32 lands. Maybe you can go lower, but you really need to have a decent bit of land in this because you're trying to fuel Delve. A lot of your cards cost a lot more than you're going to play them for, but you need to be able to get through cards to actually power them out. So ensuring that you hit your land drops is actually quite relevant in a deck like this. Another Gitaxian Probe-like effect. Street Wraith here. Yep, we're just putting this in our deck to have a weird casting cost cycling card that fuels up the Embodiment of Agonies. Also powers up Death Shadow. I suppose in a pinch you could hard cast this thing. I never have. I've always just cycled it off. Honestly, this is great in this deck. Like it's very aggressive. I wouldn't say otherwise, but it's a free way to cantrip, basically. And it sets up a lot of cards in our deck, and we have a ton of Delve. Basically, we're running all the Delve with the exception of Magmatic Sinkhole and Logic Knot that are playable. Like, I guess I should say that are playable. There's a lot more Delve cards that are not, in my maybe/sideboard list right now and or in my deck. But the playable ones are all, I think, included in here, even in the sideboard or in the main. And when I say sideboard, I mean my maybe board, guys. But, we have Hooting Mandrills, which is a card that I think in the future, if I go 4-color with this list, could be put in. And then a Magmatic Sinkhole. Logic Knot, I suppose, is not. And Logic Knot, I do think, is still playable, but I don't think that's a card this deck wants. Just too much Delve. And you get down to Gush. This is a blue-based deck. It's an Islands deck. And it runs, I believe, 7 islands. It feels like a lot more because you're running 11 fetch lands, and you're going to tend to fetch very aggressively for your blue duels. And oftentimes I don't find Gush is dead. Like, and this card is possibly, in decks like this, as strong as Ancestral Recall. It's certainly not. How do I put it? Like, if you're on turn 3 and you don't have your land drop, Gush is more powerful than Ancestral Recall, in my opinion. Because it allows you to get down your 3-drop, allows you to get deeper in the deck. You make the next 2 land drops, and you just keep developing. And this deck's curve ends at 3, realistically. So, while I do have, like, some 8-drops, like, Tombstalker, it's really a 2-drop at the end of the day. Fiery Islet, card is just great. Like, yeah, you're going to take some damage off it if you're using it for mana, but you cycle it off in the mid to late game when you don't need more mana, and or you've drawn too many, and you're still going to town. Nibble Obstructionist, this card's fine. It's my second Stifle. I do have a Stifle in the deck as a counter spell. And it's also just a 3/1 flash flyer, so you can leave up counter magic if you need to. You can develop your board with this if you need to. It just kills people quickly. Trinity Nemesis also just kills folks quickly. Is good against aggressive decks, which is kind of a nice thing because this deck's not going to be as strong against like the turbo red deck win decks. It'll struggle a little more with those, but I think it has game against them too. I don't think it's cold to them. But it's not the best of matchups. Vendilion Click up next, just very disruptive. Flash speed again, hits up people's hands, and on some certain varieties of combo decks, this thing can just end games. Embodiment of Agonies. This card gets quite big in this deck. I mean, we are delving quite a bit, so sometimes you shrink it down. But the thing is, like, if you end up like drawing into this thing after you've used delve, oftentimes you'll just faithless looting it away or something like that. I mean, you won't generally exile your faithless looting and stuff like that. So I mean, you have a lot of ways to filter out your cards. Like if you don't want this thing, you generally don't have to have it. It's not as big as I found it could get in like dredge style decks. Like, but I have had this thing get as big as like I believe a 10/10. And like as small as like a 3/3 or a 4/4, which was still fine. Like having a 4/4 flyer for 3 is still good. Like that's still Air Elemental for 3 mana is good. Goblin Rabblemaster, yeah. So these two cards just slap. War Boss and Rabblemaster. I didn't put Krenko in here, the 3 mana Krenko. He's a good card, but I don't think he's quite as powerful as these two are. I mean, in some ways he is, but these two cards just do so much the turn they come in. They make another body the turn they come in. If they're not dealt with in the turn cycle and you get an untap, you're probably just going to win. Like, they just are very hard to deal with. They're very easy to cast because they're 1 red and 2 mana. And they just slap. They just slap. Tombstalker, 5/5 flyer for 2 mana. Yep, sign me up. When I say 2 mana, I mean you're basically playing 2 black for this. Young Pyromancer, just a good aggro control card, horizontal growth style card. One card you'll note I'm not playing in here is Thing in the Ice. Thing in the Ice is actually kind of not good in this deck. I think I started off with it in the list, and then I was like, man, this card's garbage. Like, because I have all these delve threats, and like if you flip delve threats back to hand, it's just so bad because you wasted a bunch of graveyard resources just to get them out, and then like flip them back to hand. It's just not good. It's a very good tempo card, like in a more creature light, less delve heavy deck, but this is a delve heavy deck, so it doesn't quite work. Treadhorde Arcanist, I haven't seen this card in play a lot in Canadian Highlander. Like I don't think I've played against anyone who's played it, and I've loved it. Like the card is really strong. Like I mean, it's obviously strong in Vintage, Legacy, like those style of decks, like the Xerox decks in those formats, run this card. And I've been really happy with it. Like, I've gotten Thought Siege twice, I've got Ancestral Recall a couple times twice, Mental Note, Ponder, whatever. Like, you have so many 1-mana cards, and I'm not exploiting this card to the fullest extent of what it can be exploited to. Like, I think the fullest exploitation of this card is in, like, Is It Blitz, where, like, you have 1-mana pump spells, and this thing just gets massive, or you pump it up with a bunch of 1-mana pump spells, and then, like, recast, a massive pump spell from the graveyard or whatever, like a Become Immense or whatever. But in this deck, it's just going to generally it's going to buy you another card. It's going to buy you another removal spell to open up the attacking lane. It's going to buy you another discard spell. It just does quite a bit. Direfleet Daredevil, this is kind of more of a flex spot. It's a good enough creature at 2 that I kind of want to try to run it. Against other spells matters decks, this card is just a beating because it just buys a lot of advantage. Against like aggressive decks like Red Deck Wins, it buys one of their shocks to kill one of their creatures. You play this thing, blow up a Jackal Pup. It has first strike, so they're generally forced to blow it up. It's also good against like Loam because it actually exiles the Loam. So I mean, like ways that we have of dealing with like Loam style decks, like Force of Negation, the Vendilion Click, and then also the Direfleet Daredevil are all pretty creative ways of doing it. So I have enjoyed this card. Dark Confidant, this deck's very aggressive about drawing its cards. It's willing to exchange a lot of life. As you'll note, we're playing a couple 8-drops in the deck, like Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise. Not a couple, 3, I believe. And not Street Wraith, Tombstalker. But there's a lot of really big cards in this deck that are cast for a lot less mana. But you can take significant damage off your Dark Confidant in this list if you're not careful. But that's another thing, right? Like, like I was saying, like we have like the Faithless Lootings and the Careful Studies and like all these cards that allow us to have selection over the deck. Like you don't generally have to play your Dark Confidant if it's not the right matchup for it. Like if you're playing against like Red Deck Wins, like you're gonna play it out and block with it. Or you're gonna get like one draw step off of it and then like sack it to a Cabal Therapy. Or whatever. You're oftentimes just going to loot it away if it's not the right matchup for it. But against like a control deck or a combo deck where like they're going to kill you all at once anyways, they're not going to kill you incrementally, Bob's just fine. Like you can take 8 and 7 off of it. You can be at 1 life against those style of decks, and it's really not any different from being at like 100 life. You're either dead or you're alive in those matchups. In those matchups, Bob's one of the best things you can be doing because it closes the game out quick. It gives you additional resources to work with, and your life total is not relevant in those matchups. So I think, when he comes down to Bob, like Bob is one of those cards that a lot of folks I've seen, at least in the Canadian Highlander community, balk at and think like, oh, you're going crazy. You're playing like a madman. It's like, no, not really. It's just, when you have a deck like this and your selection is so vast, you don't have to play this card if you don't want to. You get rid of it, you bury it in the deck, or if it's the right matchup for it, you play it out and you just go to town with it, because this thing does make short work of folks. Snapcaster Mage, pretty ubiquitous with most blue decks. Buys back the bazillion spells that are in this deck. Deathrite Shaman, this is the reason we're splashing green right now. DRS is just great. It's acceleration if I need it to be. It's another way of dealing with Loam. It hammers graveyards. I can activate it for black or green mana against like Reanimator style decks, although I don't think Reanimator tends to be like a horrendous matchup for a deck like this that has a pretty wide range of disruption. Grim Lava Man, pressures mana dorks, can pressure life totals, knocks out a lot of relevant Death and Taxes cards. Bone Picker, pretty cool card in this deck. Like this card doesn't see a lot of love, doesn't see a lot of play. In general, this is just going to be a 1-mana 3/2 flyer with Death Touch. Trades off well. It's 1 mana in general because we have a lot of ways to kill things. So if we're playing in a creature matchup, this card's going to be great. If you're playing against like combo or control, oftentimes you're probably just going to bury this thing, kind of like I was talking about with Dark Confidant. Tassiger, just great. Gurmag Angler, just big. Death Shadow can get very big in this deck. Terramander can get very large in this deck. Delver, just great turn 1 play. Arclight Phoenix, this card's great. I've had this thing out on turn 2 in this deck. Like, it's just, when you're playing some of the cards this deck's playing for Phyrexian mana, like the Gushes, the Cabal Therapies, like you have a lot of free spells, so getting this thing down early is not hard, and it's just a recursive threat that is not that difficult to kind of get going in this list. Alright, so discard, Hand Attack, Collective Brutality, Hymn to Turek, Cabal Therapy, which you don't often see as much of, and I think this card's great. And the more I play the format and the more I realize, the more I know what's going on, the more I me personally, I understand folks' play patterns and like what is most likely out of them, and the more the value of this card goes up, to me at least as a player, it's not uncommon that I'll be able to hit someone with a Cabal Therapy and in general know what they're up to. Now, this deck also has some crutches for that too. It enables you in a lot of ways to know what they're playing, either due to like Gitaxian Probes or Vendilion Clicks, other discard in the deck. There's a lot of tutors in this format, a lot of transmuting tutors in this deck, or in this format. You can remand something and hit it with a Cabal Therapy. The card's just very powerful, and I think it's honestly underplayed for what it does. Duress, Inquisition, Thoughtseize. They have the remainder of the lands over here. So one of the things I'm going to go into before I jump into some of the gameplay, guys, is kind of talk through where I think the next direction of this deck is going, or at least the genesis of like this build theory, which this build theory is combining efficiency. It's basically trying to find a new control. Control is kind of dying off. The old school like Drago / card advantage kind of fight. Like one creature decks are kind of dying off, in my opinion. And, what does that mean for Control? I think what it means is like Control needs to, strap the selection engine that it used to have, up with an efficient threat base, so that it can end game. It can basically pivot. It can end games quickly, or it can grind into a long game, which is kind of the entire theory behind this deck. And I do think as this deck theory and this concept of build kind of goes forward, it's going to eventually adopt green into it. And you've got some cards in here that I think are going to be the ones that I'll end up including in here over a few of the other ones. And I have a few other, like Evasive Action would be great. Evasive Action would probably replace Deprive in the list. Baleful Strix, I don't know on that. Like, it's cut right now. It could be played right now. Arc Trail, also a great card, but a meta card. Demonic Consultation, I probably have a greater appetite for casting this card than most folks. I think the thing is, in Canadian Highlander, a lot of folks see this card kind of like Dark Confidant as well, and they're like, oh, you could just lose the game. Yeah, you can. That's right. But you can also just lose the game to, like, drawing 4 lands in a row. Heck, I did it this last week on Jessica. I just drew 4 lands in a row and lost the game, It's like, all right, well, and there's not much you can do. And you could just lose the game casting Demonic Consultation, or you could find exactly what you need right then to not lose the game or to immediately win the game. And the probabilities on it are fairly low for you to actually just like straight up kill yourself on it. Especially if you're on a deck that's very proactive and has the means of pressuring an opponent. Now, if you're on like a pure control deck with like 1 to 2 threats, you'd be kind of a mad lad to cast Demonic Consultation because you'll probably exile your win con and then just not be able to win. You'll probably stop them from killing you or whatever, but you will probably not win. A couple other cards that I really enjoy playing and I would like to get in here is Risefall. I think Risefall's utility increases a lot when you're playing more of an aggro control strategy that actually has creatures in it, because you can return a creature, like let's say a Snapcaster Mage, and also buy back from your graveyard like a Legion Warboss, or you can just fall your opponent after a couple turns of attrition, like when they've gotten out their mana dorks, they're down to 2 cards in hand, you're pretty sure they're off lands. It's a second Hymn to Turek, which is just very powerful as well. It's just great card advantage for 2 mana. Anyways, guys, this is the build. I found the deck is quite powerful, and very fun to play. Like, it has a lot of decision-making going on in it. And I've got to play a decent array of matchups, so I'm going to go on a quick pause, and we'll be back momentarily for some gameplay of Grixis Aggro Control. Alright, guys, we're back, and this is going to be the first game we have. We're playing against Glib Reaper. So they lead off on a turn 1 Soul Ring off of a shocked-in Overgrown Tomb. That's a pretty fast start. I just lead off with a tapped Blood Crypt, say go. Opponent plays out a 3 visits, ramping up and into a Taiga, into a retreat to Kanzu. I'm going to end up just driving out my Young Pyromancer. My hope is here, like, they just don't have an aggressive start, which it appears they don't. They have, like, a very aggressive mana start, but they don't have a threat to back it up. So I'm just going to start developing my board here. I keep the Metal Misstep. I believe bottom the Arc Trail. Anything they play is going to be huge. I just go ahead and counter Chatter of the Squirrel. They don't opt to flash it back, which is interesting. I play out the Tombstalker and Smash Face. Down to 11. They replay their Squirrel. Get on a Zuran Orb. Shock or blow up my land. Leave up the Deprive and hit them down to 3. They see their draw step and concede. As you can see, I mean, we our opponent had a very fast start. They evidently didn't have like the pressure to kind of back it up. They had a lot of mana. They kind of had very powerful opener as far as mana development goes, and they had a wasteland to kind of forestall my own development. And I played this very aggressively. I didn't leave Deprive up. I didn't Thought Seize that aggressively because of the way they played it. I came to the conclusion that they were going to be playing off the top of their deck, and Thought Seize, the utility on Thought Seize kind of went down significantly. And I think the value of Deprive is such that I really need to develop before it has value, so I took a more aggressive stance in this game, and I think it ended up paying off. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for this matchup, which I assume is against like a kind of a Jund landfall-style lands deck, basically. So momentarily, be right back, guys. Alrighty, guys, back for game number 2. And yeah, this hand's great. It's got an Ancestral Recall, I guess as they say on Ben Wheeler's stream, classic Loman. But I have to force him negation turn 1, so I'm going to be card neutral, basically. It's a 3 for 3. I guess it's a 3.5 for 1? That's fine. I still have a pretty aggressive hand here. I get to Mental Misstep the gamble. I'm kind of like actually enticed to want to yeah, I just go ahead and Deprive this. I don't want to get fast bonded in the dirt. I'm kind of enticed to actually not do that in Direfleet, Daredevil, or Gamble. Gamble is a card that I actually am interested in testing out in this deck. Like it's a fun card. I don't know if it's right. I'm obviously leaving up the Nimble Obstructionist now. I go ahead and cycle this because I realized what they were up to when we were talking. I think I played them another game. They're trying to basically polymorph in their deck. They Fatal Push this guy right here. I get to Faithless Looting, getting rid of some of these lands, which is nice. Get rid of their intent. I don't really care if they bolt my token. That's fine, they do. Very aggressive. I go ahead and Diabolic Intent my Direfleet Daredevil, finding a Snapcaster Mage for the Ancestral Recall. They get off the top ropes and Inquisition to Kozilek. I flash back my counter. At this point, I was playing Brynhorn Cutthroat, unlike the deck tech. This deck's been under consistent Genesis, so you'll see some cards that are not currently in the build that I went through on the deck tech. I just go ahead and resolve the Brynhorn Cutthroat. The Cindervines is not going to kill me. I'm going to take some damage off of it, but I think I'm fine with that. I go ahead and loot here, find a Ponder. Kind of looking for a counterspell. I shuffle this up if I'm not mistaken. Find a Legion Warboss, which is better than a counterspell. It's Pressure. They T-Del. First and last mistake, opponent. T-Del a little prematurely there, in my opinion. I'm not going to cast the Inquisition here. It's not likely they have anything relevant in play. And I have a Force of Will that I can actually hard cast here, which is a rarity for this deck. But it is turn like 11 or 10 or whatever. They basically killed all my stuff and did nothing for most of the game. So, I mean, you can do that, but I think eventually, like especially on like a more threat-rich deck like this, it doesn't really matter if they're like 1-for-1ing with you on their cards. Eventually, you'll just overwhelm them and or have a way to disrupt their last 1-for-1 and keep going. Anyways, guys, quick pause. We'll be back momentarily for the next game in these series of matches that we'll be showcasing with Grixis Aggro Control. Alright, guys, back. Playing it's Ben here, Ben Wheeler. This is the first iteration of the deck. It has Crumbling Necropolis in it. It was a more land-rich deck. I believe it had 33 or 34 before going down to 32. I leave up Spell Pierce and Spell Snare. This version also had like 3 or 4 more counter spells in it. It was a little more controlling. And I kind of found I didn't like this build. I'm trying to remember what I'm playing against here. It's a combo deck of some variety. No, Garbage Platter is what I'm playing against. I'm going to Spell Snare this. I debated piercing the Dark Ritual. There's some credence to doing it. But I kind of wanted to get the 2-for-1 out of it. They named Force of Will there. And they I think we joke. He's like, yeah, you had the Pierce and the Snare. I'm like, yes, sir. They discard an Emrakul, down to 2 cards, back up to 3, and do nothing for their turn. Go ahead and cast Risefall here. As you can see, this earlier version was playing Risefall as well. I believe it had Blightning in it. Yeah, there it is. There's the Blightning. Blightning's probably not a playable card, guys. I was just kind of having fun with this first build. Then I realized, like, hey, maybe there's something more to this. They discard an Echo of the Aeons, but don't have a third mana source. They also know that I have the Spell Pierce, so they're not going to just try to flash back their Echo of Aeons into Spell Pierce here.
And now we've got pressure because I have this Snapcaster, so I can bolt them, recast bolt with Snapcaster. That's 6 plus 2 off Snapcaster, 8 damage down to 6 over this turn cycle, plus the next. They cycle, finding a Tainted Pact. I go ahead and bolt them, and then get ready to cast Snapcaster into bolt them. I could also hand attack them, but they go ahead and concede here. I believe what happens is I cast a Snapcaster, and they just go ahead and concede because they're very dead. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back for game number 2 against Ben here. Alrighty, guys. We're back. And this hand is not great, so I mull it. This hand is fine. I get rid of the bolt because he's not likely to be playing creatures where it's relevant. He plays a Fallen Empire's land there, sack land, makes 2 black if you sacrifice it. It comes into play tapped, though. It also produces black mana. Ebon Stronghold, then Celevite Temple, which is the same for blue. Go ahead and play out my River of Tears, leave open my mana. I can Tainted Pact for a Force of Will if necessary, or I can cast the Counter Squall. He goes ahead and fetches here. Cycles a Shred Memory, I believe, finding Demonic Tutor. Yeah. I Tainted Pact, see Ancestral Recall, and I'm like, well, I can't refuse. It's possible I should have just taken or tried to go for Force of Will. But I think this is a more proactive line. They Cabal Therapy here, naming Ancestral Recall. I don't cast it in response because if he combos off, I'll just die. But he also knows that I have a Counter Squall in hand. So I know he has Demonic Tutor. He's going to find Black Lotus now, but he doesn't find the Black Lotus. He finds LED, which means he has the Black Lotus in hand, which means I'm probably dead. So Black Lotus, yep. Lotus Petal into LED. Crack Petal, Black Lotus, making black mana. Demonic Tutor for Ill-Gotten Gains. Once Demonic Tutor's on the stack, sacking Lion's Eye Diamond, finding Ill-Gotten Gains, recast the whole graveyard. The Demonic Tutor finds Yawgmoth's Will, recast the whole graveyard, and then he casts Tendrils off the second copy of Demonic Tutor, post Iggy, post Yawgmoth's Will. And actually, you can just do it with Yawgmoth's Will at this point. So I'm just dead. Cabal Therapy got me really good there, combined with the Trinket Mage as the tutor option that he had available for the Lion's Eye Diamond. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back for game number 3 in this match. Alrighty, we're back, guys. And this hand's acceptable. Creeping Tar Pit's since come out of the deck as well. That's another card that's been cut. This is likely just to be a turn 1 mental note. The Remand kind of combines nicely with the Cabal Therapy. It's a combination that's still in the deck. You just go ahead and Remand a spell and then get it with Cabal Therapy. Okay. Yep, I end up ditching my Tassiger and a Braid. The one thing this hand does not have that kind of stinks is it does not have pressure, which is not good. You definitely want pressure in this deck. I believe I topped both of those. I'm planning on remanding into Mental Misstep this turn, if I have to counter. Or correction, I wouldn't be able to because I'd be fetching. So I'm hoping to draw into Mental Misstep here and then draw into that threat if I can. I do get the untap. Just play out the Crumbling Necropolis. I could play out the Creeping Tar Pit, but I don't intend on using Creeping Tar Pit to do any damage in this matchup. It's just too mana intensive to actually use against combo. Because I am the control deck in this matchup. I go ahead and remand this. The plan is to Cabal Therapy it next turn. I draw into my my Big Fish. Go ahead and fetch for an Underground Sea. Cabal Therapy, naming Grim Tutor. Their hand is stacked, so their hand is actually pretty sick. It's got Grim Tutor, or did have Grim Tutor, Tainted Pact, Dark Ritual, and Manamorphose. This is pretty close to having enough resources to win. Tainted Pact's obviously a little worse than like a DT or something like that. It can find anything as well as DT can. This finds a Collective Brutality to attack my hand. I believe, go ahead and counter this with, is it Charm here? Because now I actually have presence on board. And now the Creeping Tar Pit will probably only attack once in this game, and it really only needs to attack once. This puts them to 9, which means they're at a virtual 1. So if they tap their Mana Confluence and or City of Brass, and they're just dead. I go ahead and Mental Misstep this. They cast a Manamorphose. I negate the Manamorphose. They then cast a Seething Song. I allow the Seething Song to resolve because that was the unknown card that was in their hand. And now they have just Tainted Pact in hand. So Tainted Pact goes on the stack. I go ahead and cast Force of Negation. They have 0 cards in hand. They are at 7 life. I have 8 power on board, and that is game. So quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily for the next game in this series of match sets with Grixis Aggro Control. Alrighty, guys, we're back. Playing against Highlander V here. This hand is unkeepable. It has no pressure. It has tons of mana. This hand's also unkeepable. It has no mana. Go ahead and keep this hand. It's a Young Pyromancer, Force of Negation, Gush hand, so it does have the ability to get back up on cards. It does have board presence. Go ahead and fetch for an Underground Sea here. Preordain, Sea Land, plus a Dreadhorde Arcanist, which Arcanist is pretty good with Preordain in the yard. Opponents on either Blue Moon, Jeskai. And the plan here is just to cast out the Dreadhorde Arcanist, because I'd actually rather have the Young Pyromancer, I think, resolve. This is probably going to eat like a Path or a Plow, because it's too much card advantage. And it does, which is fine. Like, I'd like to get this card out of their hand. It also builds up my mana base for Gush, which is really nice. Because if I'm going to go back a land drop, it's kind of nice to be able to have another one. They cast out Thalia, Heretic Cathar, which is annoying because it's going to disrupt my mana base, but I'll probably find a way. I assume I will find a way to deal with it. Cast out the Pyro. It's going to come into play tapped. Gush, try to find more blue cards. Don't find any blue cards, just kind of stinks. I play on a Marsh Flats, I can fetch a Swamp next turn, I can play my Island, and if I need to, I can play out the Embodiment. The Gush was not a very good one. But the cool thing is, I'm going to take a big-time beating from this Thalia, and it's going to help build up my Death Shadow, which is kind of like a small sub-game I'm playing here. Now, I could opt to cast out the Death Shadow, or not the Death Shadow, the Embodiment here for 2, and I think that's what I end up doing. No, I don't. I actually just opt to take more damage, which I kind of like that line because like the more damage I take, the bigger my Death Shadow gets, and it kind of helps build up that resource. I'm going to play another tapped fetch land here, which can only fetch a tapped land as well. Cast out the Death Shadow. They attempt to mana leak the Death Shadow. I memory lapse their mana leak, so unless they counter this, I know what they're going to be drawing for the turn. It appears they will be drawing it. They cast a Fire on my Young Pyromancer, which is nice because that means my Death Shadow gets to stick around. I think here a bigger threat's going to be more relevant than many threats because the Thalia fights pretty well. So I kind of have a cool techie play here. I think, unfortunately for my opponent, they kind of get a little bit outfoxed here. They put a Thalia in front of this card. I go ahead and find a shock dual land and just shock myself, regardless of the fact if it comes into play tapped or not. I can opt to actually shock myself, which I do, making the Death Shadow a 5/5, killing the Thalia in combat. They ponder, evidently find a tapped Mystic Monastery after a shuffle. Have 3 cards in hand, but I don't have faith they're probably very good cards. We know one of them is a mana leak. But I have a pretty commanding board presence right now. I'm going to play on a Tassiger here, I believe. Nope, I just go with the Embodiment. Embodiments make sense because if I play the Tassiger on, the Embodiment becomes smaller. They mana leak it, which is fine. I just want to get the resource out of their hand so that if they have like a relevant Planeswalker, I can Force of Negation it and not have worries about the mana leak being something that's going to get me. Anyways, guys, that was game number 1 against Highlander V on Jeskai Midrange versus Turbo Grixis or Grixis Aggro Control here. So quick pause, back for game number 2 here momentarily. Alrighty, we're back, guys. This hand is not keepable because it only has 1 island, and this is a 3-color deck that's splashing into green for Deathrite, so I don't think that was acceptable. If it would have been a fetch, I may have considered it off the Gitaxian Pro, but it'd still be very greedy. This hand's slow but acceptable. Lavinia is an interesting card. I think it's actually pretty good against my deck. My deck uses a lot of Phyrexian mana symbols to do stuff. So I do like it. I just play out the Direfleet Daredevil because it's just a random 2/1 first striker that fights Lavinia pretty well. And they're probably not going to want to waste removal on it. They can trip twice and do nothing else, which is good for me. It's fine. Go ahead and attack them here. They attempt to cast a Young Pyromancer out. I counterspell. They play out a Core Firewalker. So what I opt to do here is actually I fetch first, opt to attack in. One, I figure it's either free damage because they'll be like, what the hell is he doing? Is he running a Flaring Pain? Or I get to cast a Tassiger with an extra card. I get to leave a Direfleet in my yard to get some of their cantrips, and also cast out a fast Bone Picker. They cast out a Gideon of the Trials, tag my Tassiger to not do damage. They attack me for 4. I allow all the damage through, play out my dual land, attack for 4 on the Gideon, knock the Gideon out. So they got a bunch of damage through, but now my Tassiger is unlocked. I wasn't going to block those 2 cards. The Core Firewalker is good against the Grim Lavamancer, but, you know, I think it's fine. I mean, it's going to have to eventually block the Tassiger if they don't want to get killed by it, because it's much bigger than their two bears. I get the Force Negation back, not the Bolt or the Dire Fleet Daredevil, which makes sense. The Daredevil makes sense. The Bolt, I can see giving to me. I attack him for 3 here. I think maybe I should have pushed my early advantage here and just attacked him with the Tassiger, to be honest. I think maybe that was a weaker line. Part of me just wanted to delve again and then burn off their Lavinia. So I burn off the Lavinia here. They go ahead and abrade my Bone Picker, I want to say. Yep, get the Bone Picker. I end up getting Tombstalker back, which I think is an interesting choice. I think it's a much more threatening card than the Bone Picker is. I go ahead and just use Tassiger's ability here. I get back a Dreadhorde Arcanist. I attack them for 4, down to 12, and I have up 2 points of burn with the Lavamancer, plus the Force of Negation, plus the Mental Misstep. The Ancestral's coming off next turn, if I recall. Yep. Cast out a Karizev, Skyship Raider. Which is a good card. It's hard to kill. Harder to kill than most things. Go ahead and just delve everything for the Tombstalker. Attack them. Put them to 9. And they're in a rough spot right now. This is going to come off the out of the exiled zone. It'll get immediately exiled. I'm going to leave up Mental Misstep, so if they have like a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile, it's fine. All they have is like a Taxium Probe. I just go ahead and counter it because I would rather than not have a free draw that I can't counter, and I can definitely counter that. Attack with both of these and basically say good games. They weren't per se dead here, but they're pretty dead here. I mean, they're taking 5 in the air. If they block my 4/5, they lose in a minimum one of their things. It'll likely be the Core Firewalker. I'll cast on the Dreadhorde Arcanist. You know, it's just not looking very good for them. I mean, I could possibly cast on the Embodiment too. It'd only be at 2. Anyways, that was this game against Jeskai Midrange. The deck fared pretty well against it, and I think a lot of it just came down to the pure efficiency of it, and the fact that, I mean, you look at like both these games, like I was about 10 cards above my opponent as far as like what the cards I had seen in my deck or had access to in my deck, which just gave me more flexibility as a pilot to kind of play around what they were up to. Basically, they got hellbent before I did, and I had more options because I was playing with my yard as a resource to a greater extent. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back for the last game I'll be showcasing with Grixis Aggro Control. Alrighty, guys, we're back. We'll be playing this deck against Ben again. He is on a Jund Lands deck. I go ahead and Thoughtseize him. He has a hand with 2 Mana Dorks, a Duress, and a Natural Order, and a Loam, and a Grove of the Burn Willows, and Snow Forest. I get out the Dreadhorde Arcanist. Ben draws pretty well for the turn and draws into a Maelstrom Pulse, so, yep, I lose that thing. I cast out a Legion War Boss, which is good. He drew into a Kolaghan's Command, which kind of stinks. I allow the Mana Dorks to resolve. Maybe it was more correct to ditch the land there. I don't know. So I go ahead and just Treasure Cruise here. I kind of don't draw that well off of it. They cast a Duress and miss. Loam, evidently they're kind of missing now too, but they did have actually 3 very stellar draw steps. Draw into a Forked Bolt, which is nice. Cuts them down by 2 mana and takes their blockers off the board. Fetches into a Blood Crypt. Does not bring the Loam back. He needs to find gas at this point. Takes me up double red. There's no cards in my deck that require double red, so it's kind of nice for me. Draw into a Darkslick Shores and a Gush. Gush is very nice. Go ahead and Gush here. Find a Vendilion Click and an Embodiment of Agonies. Just cast it down as a 3/3. I could have left up the Vendilion Click to try to get their Loam, but like right now I don't really care if they're actually using life from the Loam. Drawing some very good cards here. and just leave out my mana. He evidently draws into something that is not pressure or the ability to block, and just goes ahead and packs it in. Even if he plays out like a Titania here, I'll just play out an instant speed Vendilion Click and have 6 power in the air, which is more than lethal. I also have 4 damage and burn essentially in hand, so kind of just get him here. Even though he had some good early answers in the form of Maelstrom Pulse, Kolaghan's Command off of the fetch land that he found off his draw steps, he kind of petered out a little bit. And we were able to kind of outcard him. As you see again, I mean, we're not a ton of cards ahead, but we are definitely 6 cards ahead of our opponent. 5 cards ahead of our opponent here after being on the play. So not a bad game. Be back momentarily, guys, for game number 2 against Ben here on Jund Lands versus Grixis Aggro Control. All right, guys, back. Hand's not keepable. Hand is better. Get rid of, I believe. I didn't see what that was. Probably a Direfleet Daredevil, I think. Fastbond, Caracas, go. Fastbond, Stomping Ground. Off Stomping Ground, Caracas, go. Go for an Underground Sea and then leave up Spell Snare. And/or Brainstorm if I need to, like, Force of Will. Play on a Dark Depths. It's possible they have a crop rotation or something like that. They don't want to play into my cards. I go ahead and Brainstorm here. Find Is It Charm Bob. I think I should have just played Bob out here, but I was really nervous. Like, this is really fishy. Like, if he kept this hand, my thinking is, like, he's got a way to make Dark Depths into a 20/20. But the problem is I also have to pressure him. So what I do here is I just opt to go for a Dark Confidant, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And I leave up my Spell Pierce, Spell Snare, Force Spike mana. Cast a Punishing Fire, I say nope. Now he ends up going for it. So he Taigas, crop rotations, the Caracas, makes a Merit Lodge. One of the cards I've been considering for the in the maybe board of this deck is Angrath's Outrage, I want to say it's what it's called, which would be very good in this situation where I just need a sacrifice effect. Because right now the deck does not have great ways of dealing with Merit Lodge, other than just like racing it. I play on a Tombstalker to block and get like a redraw off the Is It Charm. Plays on a Sylvan Caryatid. I go ahead and Thought Scour first, find a Bolt, go ahead and filter with Is It Charm and concede. So Merit Lodge got me. I'm not playing Caracas in this list. The mana is very tight, and the only utility land I'm really playing is Wasteland right now. I think Caracas may be a bit too greedy for this deck, especially with his mana light as I want the deck to be to run optimally. Another option is Vapor Snag, and in the first iterations I was running Vapor Snag, but I just kind of found that it was too situational, and in Grixis, like, you don't really need Vapor Snag in Grixis to actually have that effect. Like, you have Snuff Out, you have Fatal Push, you've got Dismember. I feel like Vapor Snag is a much better card in like blue-green tempo or like Rug tempo, where like you just want to have the ability to interact with big things. There are options like running Cryptic Command, but like Cryptic Command's a 4-mana spell, and right now I'm kind of off 4-mana spells in this deck, so we'll see. That could be a viable option, though, as like a curve topper. Quick pause, guys. We'll be back momentarily with the last game in this match. Alrighty, guys, back. Yeah, I'm going to keep this. Like, this is a one-lander, but it's got a redraw off of the Street Wraith. Let's see what they do here. They cast out a Deathrite Shaman, find a Volcanic Island, draw 3. Cast out my Grim Lavamancer because I would really like to deal with this Deathrite Shaman before it can pressure my yard, which is a very necessary resource for my deck to function. They attempt to cast on a Sylvan Library. I Spell Pierce it. They cast on a map, which is fine. Brainstorm's really cool. I actually opt to fetch first because I want to hymn them. So I hymn them down to 1 card. They draw for the turn, play out a Elvish Reclaimer. I snuff out their Elvish Reclaimer. And now they're at 0 cards with 3 lands and a map in play, which does not seem like a great spot for them to be in. And I have this embodiment to power up. I cast out the Brainstorm here. It's kind of an awkward Brainstorm because I find 3 Delve cards. Just like, oof. They find a... What do they find again? A Manland. Raging Ravine here. Which is actually... I like their play because I'm at 10 life. Like, I've been just hammering the crap out of my life total. They shuffle my library for me, which is actually kind of nice because I had 2 Delve cards, and I really only wanted, like, maybe 1 more Delve card because I had this Dig Through Time already. I think I shuffle this up. I do, and I find the Swamp, which is annoying because the Prismatic Vista can find no more lands at this point. But I forget that when I'm playing the game. I kind of screw up here. I play it out, and I'm like, oh shit, I can't actually use that. So I end up attacking them because I'm just going to leave Bolt up to kill the Raging Ravine if they find the land, and if they find a 5-drop, which is relevant, I'll just daze it. But I can't cast out the Charter Course there, because if I cast out Charter Course, I cannot realistically deal with the Raging Ravine, and I'll take 4 damage off of it down to 6, which gives them a lot of ounce to have like a tempo win. I'd rather not give them ounce to just like beat me to death with the Raging Ravine. So I don't actually cast it there. Now I do cast that card, and now I have Treasure Cruise available to me. I probably can't lose now. I go ahead and Memory Lapse this. Draw into this card. So I play this, in my opinion, too passively here. Like, I end up blowing up the Courser. If I'd actually done math, I would have realized they were just dead to Bolt to face here. But I'm kind of playing for value right now. And part of this, like, you know, you can call it styling if you want. Part of the reason I'm playing this way is because I actually wanted to see like how well this deck could grind against like a truly grindy deck, which is like a Jund Lands deck. It's a very truly grindy deck. So I wasn't attacking. My game plan wasn't really as an aggro control deck. It was more like, hey, can I grind with them? And like, I honestly think we found that we could grind with them pretty well. Draw to Faithless Looting here. Go ahead and cast Faithless Looting. I am going to miss lethal this turn. So I discard these 2 cards, cast out the War Boss. Should have just Treasure Cruised again. They go ahead and pack it in here, though. I think they're actually dead to this. They may be off by 1. Anyways, that was this game against Ben here. I do think this deck does have the ability to grind. Like I said, when I was attacking this game, I didn't look for a tempo win here. I actually looked for like a true like kind of mid-range win, where I just like killed everything they did, countered everything they did, and just 2-for-1 them into the dirt, and just eventually win with whatever I have on board. In this case, you know, random aggro control threats. And yeah, so that's the deck, guys. That's kind of some of the gameplay with it. You got to see games against Jeskai midrange, Jund Lands, different lands build, and what was the last one? And combo, Garbage Platter, Garbage Trough, Garbage Plate. I don't know which version of Garbage Whatnot deck Ben was on before. But the deck has a pretty decent range, I think. I think it can fight against most things pretty well. It's not going to be the best against, like, turbo aggro decks. Like, Red Deck Wins is probably a tougher matchup, but I do think it's winnable. And I think, you know, I think honestly this is a good place. I'm very happy with where this deck's getting. I do think eventually it's going to convert into a check pile style deck where it's going to want to run green for access to Run and 6, which I currently have on the board, and I've kind of been entertaining some ideas on Discord with what that deck's going to look like. But I think it will play like Run and 6, Tarmogoyf, Abrupt Decay, possibly Hooting Mandrills, possibly Berserk. We'll see. I think there's a lot of room to grow in it, but I do think that's the way the deck wants to go, is play like a 4-color kind of like basically low curve mid-range deck. Very low curve mid-range deck. But anyways, guys, I hope you have enjoyed this video content on Grixis Aggro Control in the 100-card singleton format. I've definitely enjoyed building the deck and sharing it with you guys, so I hope it is at least informative or entertaining. And if you have any questions on it or would like to see more of my ideas on this deck list, go ahead and hit me up in the comments. Alright, guys, enjoy and take care now.